We're in Galatians 6, 1 through 10. And what I'd like to do is talk about our need for covenantal community. Okay? Now listen, I'm going to try to just talk through my notes on this. And if you want to interject, we're not going to discuss over lunch. We're going to just hang out together. So if you see something and you want to say something, go ahead. But I'm going to try to stick to my notes fairly closely so we can kind of motor through this. All right? But this is important, I think. So we are in the midst of a 3-part series, if you want to call it a series. I'm like, oh, I guess we're doing 3 things there. Let's call it a series today. This is the 3rd part. But the series, you find Galatians 6? Yeah, Galatians.
Well, I have to Galatians.
There you go. Okay. 3-part series on how God works. 2 weeks ago, first part, we talked about how God operates out of Psalm 39. If you remember, the Bible teaches that God gives or allows trouble, turmoil, and challenge because God actually sees that that is the thing we need most to grow and change. It's an opportunity. That was 2 weeks ago. The second week, last week, we talked about what God wants. This was from Matthew chapter 25, the parable of the talents. And we asked the question, what are you doing with what you've been given? Okay, so trouble, turmoil, challenge. What are you doing with what you've been given? This week, okay, if that's how God operates and what God wants, this week is what we need. It's Galatians 6, it's covenantal community. Here's 3 points. Paul is going to give us a vision for covenantal community. He's going to give us the reality for covenantal community. He's going to give us the secret to covenantal community. So vision, what is this thing? Reality, there's a couple of things that have to happen in order for you to experience it. Secret, it's actually not what you think. Okay, in some ways, everything I say today is going to be very simple, but you would be amazed at how many people in churches, particularly American churches, people who identify as followers of Jesus, struggle to put this into practice, and as a result, they don't experience covenantal community, even though they're in churches. Okay? Yet I think this is one of the definitive marks of the early church. Okay, so let's start with this. Number 1, what is this vision for covenantal community? At first blush, this passage feels kind of like a set of random instructions tacked on to the end of what Paul's been saying. Actually, there is a theme in this, though, that ties the whole thing together, and I believe that it has a lot to do with this concept that I'm calling covenantal community. Now, what does that mean? Let me give you a quick definition. Covenantal community is how God's people conduct life together. How God's people conduct life together. Now listen, covenant, that is an Old Testament concept where people made vows and promises. Think of it as like ground rules for relationship. Okay, that's the covenant part. Community, do you remember what God says in the Old Testament? I will be your God, you will be my people. Okay, there's relationship there. Look at verse 2. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Do you hear the law of Christ language? Okay, that's ground rules, that's covenant. And then do you see bear one another's burdens? That's life together as God's people. So this passage is actually going to show us what life together is supposed to look like. It's going to give us a vision for it. Does that make sense? Pretty simple, okay, but it's really profound. So let's unpack this because there's some things that you might misunderstand. First of all, look at verse 1. What is the very first word? Brothers. You could actually translate that if you have a footnote. It says brothers and sisters. It'd be the plural form, brethren. It doesn't just mean the boys. It means men and women, guys and gals, brothers and sisters, but he's talking to people in the church. Okay? Then he says this, if anyone is caught in transgressions. And if you're listening, when you hear that, you might be tempted to listen. Here's what he's not doing. He's not saying, okay, here's Life Together. We're going to form a committee to watch for people. Yeah, it's like a neighborhood watch for people's sins. No, he's not saying we're not trying to catch people. There's a different sense of the word caught. The entire book of Galatians is actually about bondage and freedom. Okay? So if anyone is caught, what Paul is talking about here is somebody who is trapped or in bondage to something, to transgression. Now I want you to think, in any transgression, if you've been around All Souls, you know that the Bible doesn't just define sin as bad behavior. It's more complex than that. Jesus in the New Testament defines it as self-focus and self-absorption. So what kinds of self-focus and self-absorption might trap you in bondage? Let me give you an example. It could be bad behavior. For instance, if you are self-absorbed with your appetites, your desires, your cravings, it very well might lead you to indulge in things that you ought not indulge. And before you know it, you might actually find yourself addicted. And that's probably going to manifest itself as bad behavior. All sorts of things we can be addicted to. Okay? What I'm getting at is bad behavior, when you dig beneath it, it's really self-focus and it's bondage where you're like, why do people do drugs? Okay? They get hooked on a feeling, a high that it gives them, but they end up in bondage to it. Now listen, there are other ways you can be in bondage. You can be in bondage to your reputation. You can be in bondage to your appearances. You can be in bondage to what other people think of you, about you. That can be just as self-focused, self-absorbed, okay? But often, instead of bad behavior, people that are that kind of self-focused and self-absorbed, they have good behavior. They do all the right things. Whatever people want to hear, they're going to say it. They never show anything that might make somebody look down. You see what I'm saying? The exact same self-focus, but it manifests itself in a completely different way. Good behavior, not bad behavior. So the point here is when Paul talks about being in bondage to transgression, he's actually talking to people that are getting really serious about the Old Testament. And he's going, that path will trip you up and it will put you in bondage. Okay? So it's broader than just bad behavior. It's anything that has you in bondage. The passage is saying that we as community need to help one another escape from bondage. Okay?
So
Malachi.
you're just saying that word caught, you could replace that with enslaved. Right?
Yeah.
Enslaved, trapped.
We're enslaved. What are we in bondage to? What are you in bondage to? I'm going to give you some examples here in just a second. Now listen, this probably doesn't sound by rocket science. Here's the point. Covenantal community is supposed to help one another get untrapped, get unencumbered, get out of bondage. The things that have you in bondage, whether it's bad behavior or whether it's your self-esteem. You got too much of it. Okay, you care too much about what other people think about you. Okay, that can have you in bondage too. Community is here to help. Now listen, here's the part that's really interesting. Look at verse 2. Paul says what? Bear one another's burdens. Okay, so fulfill the law of Christ. Now look down at verse 5. For each one will have to bear his own load. Does that sound like a contradiction to you? It should. He's saying, you need to bear one another's burdens. Every single person needs to bear his own load. Well, which is it? And the answer is both. Okay?
You're comparing keep watching yourself to that bear one another's burdens.
Say that again.
Where's the contradiction?
Listen, when he said, if I say, hey,
2 verses 5.
Oh, okay.
2 verses 5, Noah, you got to bear one another's burdens. Noah, everybody needs to bear their own burdens.
Got you.
You hear it feels like a contradiction.
Yes.
What's going on? Here's the context. God, remember, gives trouble, turmoil, and challenge. Your suffering is a gift from God, or it can be. It's an opportunity to grow. So trouble, turmoil, challenge. When you feel challenged, the opportunity to grow. Now listen, what does God give? We talked about this last week to his people. He gives gifts. But if you remember from last week, I said there's about 20 specific spiritual gifts. There's more than that in the New Testament. 19 out of 20. Do you remember what I said last week? Who are they for? They're for others. Here's what I want you to see. You've got trouble, turmoil, and challenge. Everybody faces it. God gives spiritual gifts. So Noah, let's say you feel really troubled. You are in turmoil. God is just challenging you with something in your life. He is going to take the thing that you need, the gift, and he's going to give it to somebody else. And you're like, why didn't you give that to me? And the answer is because he wants the other person to share it with you. Does that make sense? That's actually what covenantal community is. Now listen, here's the kicker. Well, there's a little part in here in verse 3. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Let each one test his own work, then his reason to boast will be in himself alone. 2 things I just want to say about this. I think he is saying everybody in the church suffers from this. Okay? In other words, it's not like, oh, there's some people that have challenges. I think he is saying, if you think that you're not challenged, you're not seeing yourself clear, you have challenges. And that actually means it's universal in the church. And the giftedness that you need, it's in somebody else. And by them helping you bear your burdens, both of you will actually become stronger and able to bear your own burdens. That's the vision for covenantal community. Here's what this means. If you're burdened and challenged, you're going to have to share it. And if somebody's burdened and challenged, somebody's got to help them. Okay? And that's actually how both of us become strong enough to bear the load. So that's the first thing. A vision for covenantal community is actually this community that is sharing life together, not just the good stuff, but the hard stuff, and we're helping each other through it by carrying each other's loads, and that actually makes us stronger and the person we're helping stronger, where we start to be able to carry our own loads. That's the vision. Okay, let's talk about the reality of covenantal community. Are you seeing this in the text now? It's actually really interesting when it starts to emerge. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 realities, but first I want to show you something in the text. If you look at verses 6 through 10, listen to verse 6. Let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Do you hear the sharing language? And then right after that, in verse 7 and 8, do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. He goes from sharing language to sowing and reaping language. Okay? Now here's what I want to tell you about this. Reality number 1. This is personal. Has to do with sharing and caring. How are you doing at sharing places where you are experiencing bondage with the rest of your community? If you just sit there and you're like, no, how are you doing? Fine, fine. Is anybody ever going to know? Nope, they're not going to have a clue. Okay? So how can they possibly help you? Guess what? It won't be covenantal community. It'll be a bunch of individual people kind of doing their individual things, everybody thinking, wow, everybody else is put together. Chelsea's so put together. Okay. And in other words, what we actually need to do in order to have covenantal community is we've got to get better at sharing. But we also have to get better at caring. Let me actually read my notes here. The people that God has gifted to help you, they can't do it if you don't open up and let them in. Now, the flip side is, how are you doing at caring for those who are caught, stuck, trapped in bondage? Now, listen, that trapped in bondage, it might just be fear. So let's say you're going through a bunch of physical stuff. Like right now, I would imagine that some of the people that we know who are like Marie, losing her eyesight, Belem, struggling with cancer. We know a lot of people that are, okay, just to be able to encourage those. How are we doing at actually caring for people who are in trouble, in turmoil, feeling challenged? Some of it is fairly obvious, but there's others that's not as obvious. And the point is, okay, we've got to be caring and we've got to be sharing. Both of those things have to happen. How are we doing at bearing one another's burdens? Now listen, let me ask this question. This is like, apply this. Where are you dependent on your community? And if you're like, I don't actually depend on this community for anything, then you are not experiencing covenantal community. Okay? Where are you sharing your needs? Where are you learning? Where are you like being vulnerable? Where are you letting people in? Second question, where are you caring for the community? Actually saying, oh my goodness, there's somebody else that has needs. Okay, they need to learn something. He talks about teaching in here. His point is, I think, that we need both sides of this. Now I want to give you two notes, and these are just like important. I'm not going to try to really back them up. We can talk more if we need to. First of all, when you open up and share, it doesn't have to be with the entire community. Okay, sometimes, like let's say somebody has cancer. You might want to share that with the entire community so everybody can be praying, so we can lay hands, but listen, there's other things that you struggle with that are actually best shared with a smaller group of people. Okay? So when you hear me talk about sharing, some people never ever share because they think, oh, if I share, I've got to share with the entire church. And the scriptures don't say that. Okay? And I just want to be clear. Like there are places where Paul talks about modesty for the body, and he speaks about people that are weak and have struggles. The point is, certain things are best shared in smaller, safe groups. Guys, some of us have things we struggle with that really should probably be shared with a handful of close guys. Girls, some of you have things that you struggle with that should probably be shared with a handful of close women. Okay. Different people are going to have different things, but the point is, are you sharing with somebody? Second thing, I don't think we have the option of doing, remember what we're saying is sharing and caring. I don't think Paul has given us the option where he's like, okay, who wants to be the sharers? Okay, who wants to be the carers? Everybody's like, I'll care for people, but I don't want to open up. Or somebody's like, I'll open up, but I don't want to help anybody. Paul is actually saying, I think everyone has needs and burdens, which can only be borne by the sharing with others. So even the most, think about it, even the strongest person has things that you need to open up, learn, and be vulnerable about.
Something that I think is beautiful about this is this covenantal community is not something that is just for Christians who are mature, right? This is something that anybody at any walk of life can actually be done, right? Like our girls and some of our new Christians.
Yep.
Like you guys as kids, you can be like praying for people, and you can be listening, and you can be contributing, and that's actually like building you up into something that is going to be. Were you going to say that?
Yes, this is good. This is such a great segue. Even the most needy, even the most junior. Like, listen, I gave the example with Sally and the little toy. I guarantee you, Judah, if he had the right, like, if it clicks, I don't know if it will or not. There's an age. Maybe it won't. Okay, but the point is, even young kids actually have a tremendous capacity to go, oh wait, this is a way I can help. This is a way I can contribute. I could actually pray for people in the church. I could actually watch out for toys so the dog doesn't eat them. The point is, you might be racked with struggles, racked with addictions, you might have all sorts of problems. You still have the opportunity to be incredibly helpful to somebody else. Okay? Now listen, here's reality. So reality number one is, in order to experience this, you've got to be sharing and caring both. Reality number two, I'm just going to say it has to do with proximity or location. Now here's what I mean by this. Where does this sharing/caring happen? This is more difficult to show from this passage, so I'm going to give you a couple of other passages. Hebrews 10:24 and 25 says, don't stop meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. Almost every time Paul uses language about meeting together, he is talking about Sunday worship. Okay? Now in Acts chapter 2, verse 46, do you guys remember Acts chapter 2? The famous part starts with, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayers. That's like 2:42. Okay, well down in verse 46, it says day by day, listen to the two things they're doing. They're attending the temple together. That's a corporate worship kind of thing. Large group. They're breaking bread in their homes. That's small and that's personal, familial. The church throughout history, this is the part I'm just kind of asserting. I can back it up, but the early church for the first 3 centuries, okay, said we need 2 things in the life of a Christian. Corporate worship, gathering together. Now, they weren't big, but it was still corporate. Gathered together on a Sunday where you actually have teaching and sharing and music and things like that, the Lord's Supper sacraments. Okay, that's really important. Second thing, weekly connection in homes with families. You need both of those things. In other words, you need the Sunday thing, you need the weekly connection thing. Now listen, it is extremely difficult to have covenantal community where you're actually carrying each other's burdens without having corporate worship. And you go, I'm going to explain why and just say strong teaching and vision. But also, you need to have personal connection throughout the week, sharing and caring. Because as a church grows, you get to the place where you can't share everything. It's hard to share in a group of 25 people, or 30 people, or 35 people. It is almost impossible to share in a group of more than 40 people. Not share deeply. But guess what? It's way easier if you have like a family connection during the week with a handful of people over dinner. And we're like, how are you doing, Justin? You know, like, no, really. And it's just a couple of people. Like, you won't say much on Sunday, but if we're over dinner, you will speak. Okay? Now listen, this is important. A lot of house churches that I have seen tend to minimize the corporate worship, okay, in favor of life together during the week. I have heard people say, it's like, look, it doesn't even matter if we meet together on Sundays. We get together all week long. I have also heard plenty of traditional Christians that say, look, it doesn't really matter if we meet together during the week. I go on Sundays. There's great teaching. And I'm saying to you, I think we need both. And if you don't have both, okay, I think your experience, it's not really going to be a covenantal community. It's going to be more of just like a church community in an American sense. You might believe the same things. You might profess the same things. You might like the same music. You might like the teaching or preaching. You might like the people, okay? But you're not actually experiencing this thing that I'm calling covenantal community, where we actually make promises and carry burdens because we're sharing deeply and people are like, I'm in. I think we've got to have 2 things. You've got to have sharing and caring, but you also have to have a a weekly thing on Sunday that's really important, and you got to find a way to be connected during the week. And that is hard in a place like Austin because we are scattered. So you're going to have to work hard to actually make that a priority. Okay, couple of questions. What are you sowing? Because remember, he uses that language in here. Are you sowing independence, self-sufficiency? I don't need to share, I got this. I'll take care of it myself. You see what I'm saying? Because if that's what you're sowing, you are going to reap something from it. Where are you carrying the needs of others? If you look in the mirror and go, I'm actually not helping anybody carry any needs in this church, you're dropping the ball. And you're missing out on something you need. Like God gives you gifts to help other people because the helping is actually good for you. Okay? What are you prioritizing? Sundays or the weekly connections or both? Okay? See, this is what we're getting at with covenantal community. It's not just about making vows, like I believe, and then we go through the creeds or we go through the vows, our membership vows. It is so easy to say those vows and be like, of course I believe God's a father. Yes, I believe in Jesus. Yes, I believe I'm a sinner. Yes, I want to try to follow him. But listen, the point of those vows is actually that we're going to do this together. Okay? That's when it becomes not just a church community, but a covenantal community. It's actually entering into a life together that is a disciplined life, a discipled life, an honest life, and it's going to involve sharing your needs, but also carrying the needs of others, and it's going to mean connecting during the week, not just on Sundays. Now, that may not be possible for everyone, but man, we should all be striving for that. Malachi, quick question.
Just a note on the carrying, carrying other people's burdens.
Yep.
Something that we've experienced over the years is you get apathetic as a self-defense mechanism. And a lot of times for Jordan and I, that apathy comes because we don't know how to tap into the power of God. And we don't believe in the power of God to carry those burdens. So there's like underpinning all of this, you have to be able to pray and actually understand how to tap into the power of Christ.
Yep.
And I think, sorry, just a layer over that is that, do we really believe that Jesus is King of the universe?
Yeah.
Right? If you can like believe that, and it's like instead of it being an abstract, like, yeah, I think God is in control of this, but it's like, no, like, do I really like challenge yourself in that moment when you become apathetic and you're like in there and you're feeling that fear for that person? It's like, if you believe Jesus is the King of the universe, you've got a lot more power and a lot more gumption behind every prayer because you know that it's already handled and it's already taken care of, and you're just ushering in the kingdom.
I think too that's why I'm thinking how remedial we are, right? Of like we've been doing Tuesday night prayer now for what 9-10 months now. Of like how many times I have like barely crossed the finish line into prayer night, where you're like, I'm not making it, and then I go to prayer night and I leave and I'm better, right? Of like the weekly meeting thing is like I can only go a few days really without counsel. I can only go a few days of like how when we don't believe that he's King of the universe, like other people can for us, right? Just like saying earlier, like when I don't have faith, Jordan does. When Jordan does it, I do. Like I can carry that for you in that space of like that you just can't do alone. And then more than likely when you're remedial and when you're far, you won't do alone, but someone else will for you. In that way, of like why it's so important for us, even like you said, even if it's one other person, to just like meet and be honest, so they can kind of like in Matthew lower you down, like the paralytic in Matthew.
So let's transition to the third point, which is what's the secret to this kind of covenantal community? And it's Jesus, but I'm going to give you two things. Some of you might actually be feeling a little bit convicted. They're like, you know what, I'm not really doing this thing very well. Here's what I want to encourage you with. Instead of going like, okay, I'm going to suck it up and do it, start by just praying and getting really honest with God and saying, oh, this is like confession and repentance. Just going like, wow, is this actually something you want from me? I'm not sure I'm doing a great job of this. What would you like to tell me? What would you like? Start by talking and listening with Jesus. Now listen, others are like, I love this. How do I motivate other people? So you see what I'm saying? If you're challenged, do that thing. But if you're somebody that's going, I want to try to encourage other people, how do we do that? And I want to point something out. How do we help move people in this direction and motivate them? There's two approaches that aren't good, and a third that Paul does. So there's the carrot, the stick, and there's the way of the gospel. Here's what the carrot is. And there's probably more than one carrot, but there's a lot of carrots. Like here's one example. Some people are like, look, if you do all this, God's going to bless you. Blessing, that's the carrot. There's a slightly more sanctified version of it, which is what we actually offer people is community. We're like, wouldn't this be an amazing community? And people are like, oh, that would be an amazing community. And what we're doing is we're trying to pitch the perfect community. Now listen, lots of people come to church because they are looking for community. That's not a bad thing. That may bring you to church, but it will not keep you there, because community is inevitably difficult. Okay? So what I want to just caution you on, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he's got a great little book called Life Together. He actually has this really fascinating thing where he says the most fatal thing to a community, Christian community, you know what it is? The wish dream. And he's like, people come with these incredible, like they've got a dream of the perfect community that's just going to make everything better. And he's like, the reality, like it crushes them, or their wish dream will kill the church. So what I'm getting at here is, as much as we love community, I'd encourage you not to come simply for community or to just offer people like, oh, this is such a great community. I think it is a great community. But that's not what I want to offer people. That's kind of the carrot. Now listen, sometimes we use the stick. What's the stick?
Excommunication.
Threats. Okay, listen. Yeah, okay. We're Presbyterian. I've never actually had to excommunicate anybody. But I'm serious. It's never happened. Listen, you know what the Galatian church was doing? They were actually being tempted to go back to the law. If you read the book of Galatians, the Galatians were Christians that were actually starting to go, we're trying to be really, really serious. And how do you get people to be really serious? You need to freaking read your Bibles. You need to do what it says. And by the way, man, there's a lot of good commandments in the Old Testament. And what they were doing is going back to the law as a way to try to motivate change. And Paul goes, don't do it. That will actually put you in bondage. Okay? Even when you're well-meaning. So listen, if you're not going to use a carrot, and you shouldn't use the stick, what do you actually use to motivate people? And I just want you to think of this. If you read Galatians, Paul was very troubled and concerned about this church. He was actually way more troubled and concerned about this church going back to the law than he was about the Corinthian church, which was doing all sorts of really crazy stuff. Okay? That church was a mess, but he was more concerned about the Galatian church. But he is surprisingly compassionate with the Galatians. Okay? He doesn't lay down the law and hammer them. And you say, why?
Imagine that.
What'd you say?
He says, restore them in a spirit of gentleness, right?
Restore them in a spirit of gentleness. Listen, Paul knows what it is like to be addicted to himself. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. According to the law, blameless. He was so full of pride. He was so full of self-focus. He was in such bondage to his reputation, and it actually meant that he couldn't hear the words of Jesus. He opposed the work of Jesus. He was fighting against God. That's how Paul says it. I was voting for people to be put to death because they believed in Jesus. And what did God come down and do? Kick his ass? No. Enlightened him and had mercy on him and gave him a new direction. And Paul, here's what I'm getting at. Paul can be so compassionate with other people in their struggles because Paul has seen how Jesus was compassionate with him in his struggle. And when you want to motivate people, the number one thing that will really motivate them is compassion and love and sacrifice. And if you find your life lacking compassion, lacking love, lacking sacrifice, do you know what that's usually a sign of? You don't understand how much God has done for you. So rather than just going, hey, y'all need to do more, what I'd love to try to do is say, hey guys, let's keep pressing into Jesus to see how much he's done for us. That's the way of the gospel. So as we pursue this community, we're never going to put our hopes in the community. Trust me, as a pastor, I've hoped in churches. They always let you down. And I've seen churches that hoped in pastors. Pastors will always let you down. The one person who will never let us down, Jesus. So what we're going to do is we are going to pursue this, but we're pursuing it because we're really after Jesus. And you know what? When other people fail or we fail, we're going to trust that Jesus can forgive and heal. And when we see people in need, we're going to trust that Jesus brought that person and put them and made that need manifest so that maybe I can be a help. And you know what? When I struggle myself, I'm going to be the first to confess. Like, why is Paul able to say, I am chief among sinners? Trustworthy saying. We should all be saying that, and we should all be practicing it. And if you find yourself going, I can't actually get real and honest with people about places where I'm in bondage, it's probably a sign you haven't really dealt with Jesus yet on that and understood how he deals with you. Okay, let's pray.